Hey there, everyone. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Boston Core Sports Medicine's virtual sports program. My name is Andrew Chandler, and I'm currently the head athletic trainer at Lakeland High School in Suffolk, Virginia. Today, I have a special guest with me. His name is Jared Minucci, and he's also an athletic trainer. And I'm going to go ahead and let him talk about his background and where he is and let him take the show for a minute.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jared Minucci. I'm the athletic trainer at Eastern View High School in Culpeper, Virginia. I'm a school employee. In addition to being the athletic trainer, I also teach in the sports medicine program as a part of our career and technical education department.
Awesome. So just a little bit about Jared and I's background too. We both went to Longwood University, which is in Farmville, and we graduated with our bachelor's of science and athletic training in May of 2018. So both of us have that sort of background as well, which is obviously where we met. And I thought it would be awesome to have him on here for you all because we both have a similar background, but we both have some intricacies in it as well. And we can give two different perspectives on the topic of today, which actually is off-season training. We're going to discuss general off-season training for many sports, but we're going to focus mainly on basketball, as that is the season that is coming up in Virginia High School League the soonest, and that season will bypass pretty quick. And we want to give this information out to allow the athletes and coaches of those athletes the proper information to better themselves in the future and along the pipeline of the next generation of players who are coming through our schools. So just to open this up a little bit, Jared, I'm just curious, in your opinion, why do you believe that off-season training is important just as a general statement?
Off-season training is really important because that's where you get to improve on your weaknesses from your sport. So just like if you have a low free throw percentage, you're going to focus more on your free throws in the off season. So if you've noticed that I'm not able to get up and rebound quite as well as I should, or I'm not quite as quick off the ball, changing directions, making plays, coming off different screens. That's really your time to focus and get better, build your strength up, and really help with improving your performance. But in the weight room specifically, it's really about trying to prevent injuries as much as possible, and trying to get as strong as you can so that you can jump higher, you can run faster, you can shoot from a longer distance, things like that.
Okay. So that's good. That's specific to basketball and whatnot. What would you say for just other general athletes? So maybe someone who doesn't play basketball, they may be a field hockey player, could be a baseball player, cross country runner. Why do you believe, in addition, if there is anything in addition, why do you believe that that is important to those athletes as well?
Lifting weights gets your body stronger. All sports use the same muscles. It's just some sports use them more than others, and it always has some sort of effect for increasing your performance. Like squats are obviously going to help a lot with basketball, but they're also going to help with baseball. Even though you don't do a whole lot of jumping, you still have to be able to use your legs to create force, to throw, to hit. And in cross country, you want to increase your stride length and your stride frequency to increase your speed so that you can get faster times, and then obviously improve your performance for your sport.
Awesome. So, backtracking a little bit, I see that you mentioned the weight room, and I consider that one of the most important methods of off-season training and so forth for whatever sport the athlete is playing, whether it is basketball or if it's cross country, field hockey, lacrosse, whatever the case is. So, I just want to hear your opinion on the various types of off-season training or different methods of off-season training, what are some examples that you see specifically for basketball players right now? What would you see as some viable ways to have off-season training and to, push their performance later on?
You're talking right now, correct?
Yes.
So really, when we're in the weight room, is that sort of what you want me to go on a little bit
Yep.
more? A little bit
Absolutely.
more weight room. So when we're talking sport training for sport, you want to look at the whole umbrella. So the different movements that occur. So we have our jumping, you have shuffling, so you have vertical movement, you have horizontal movement, and there's always going to be a rotation component as well. But in those movements, you need to look and see what are the common injuries. So in basketball, we see a ton of ACLs. We see even more ankle sprains. So that shows us that there's poor control and poor muscle strength in the lower half. So that's typically where we focus. So what I like to do is obviously we have to get our squats in, we have to get our deadlifts in, and then we have our different variations of it. So when I'm looking at preventing injuries, I like to do a lot of things unilaterally or one side. So in the lower half, I like to use split squats a lot because one, the research has shown that you can train using lower weight and still get the benefit of using heavier bilateral or two-legged movements. So if you have an athlete that squats 250 pounds, doing split squats or lunges with weights even as light as 25 pounds can have the same effect as using a weight for normal barbell squats at 50% of their max. So it's a really great way to challenge them in terms of balance, strength, without a whole lot of equipment. And then once they go back to doing other movements, all of a sudden they're a lot stronger, they're a lot faster, they can change directions quicker, they feel more comfortable, their balance is improved because they spend more time on one foot, things like that.
Gotcha. So my next question of that is, I'm sure you've heard of the saying of less weight, higher reps. I'm sure that's a terminology that you've heard many times. So would you be saying, in what you're saying is this is unilateral, that's beneficial for unilateral to complete those. Is it beneficial to do it bilaterally as well? So if you're doing squats, to have a lighter weight but higher reps, but still doing it bilaterally, do you believe that there's benefit in that as well? Or do you like the complete isolation of unilateral compared to the bilateral?
I like to use them together. There's some research that shows doing unilateral work or single leg work before doing double leg work and vice versa. But typically I like to vary, the lighter weight and the higher reps and the higher weight, lower reps for both movements because they both have their place and they both serve a role. But typically when I see basketball players, they spend we have two ends of the spectrum. So on one end, there's that power, trying to get as fast as possible, do a lot of jumping. People tend to use the Vertimax, right? And then it's just like the basketball type movements over here. But on this side, we have the pure strength. So our heavy 1 rep max for our squats, our bench, our deadlifts, things like that. So we have to sort of balance it out. So they spend too much time over here, and then their pure strength is lacking. And there's sort of a lack of common knowledge on, it's okay to be really, really strong because it's going to help you in your speed, your speed and power aspects of your sport, because the power is really the force that you exert over time. So it's really how fast can you exert this force. So if you increase the amount of force that you can produce, and the time stays the same that you exert that force over, you're going to jump higher. Even though you don't do it faster, you're exerting more force. So really, I like to focus on the heavier strength conditioning aspect of it in terms of my bilateral stuff, and then unilateral single leg type things. I like to use a little bit higher reps, typically to get just a little bit more mass on the athletes, because what we've all seen the basketball players with toothpick legs. They might be able to jump out of the gym, but they don't have a whole lot of muscle bulk. And typically bigger muscles are stronger muscles.
Absolutely. And that kind of answered a couple of the questions that I had. But one of the questions that I have for you now is that we were discussing mainly basketball because, as we said before, that's the sport that's coming up the soonest. How could this similar terminology, similar ideals translate over to, let's say, like we said before, like a field hockey player or cross country runner or whatever the case is, because field hockey is somewhat of the same movements. There is some horizontal movements, there is vertical movements if for some reason a ball comes off the ground, anything of that sort, but there is less. How would you implement those types of things into a different sport other than basketball, or are they just generally similar?
Generally, it's all pretty similar. Surprisingly, I know when I was first going down the track, I thought, cross country should do high reps for just a couple of sets, and then just over various internships and classes and different continuing education stuff, I've sort of seen that power training and pure strength really is the best thing to do, because a strong athlete is more resilient to injuries. So once you become stronger as a person, your tissues become stronger, your muscles, your ligaments, your bones, your tendons, all of that, because Wolff's Law states that the body will adapt to the forces that are placed upon it. So we want to get the body as strong as possible in order to help be a little bit more resilient to the injuries. But when it comes down to it, you just sort of have to find the movements that make the most sense for the kind of equipment that you have. Mm-hmm. And you also always need to incorporate lower body pushes and pulls. So your squats, your deadlifts, and then you also have to mix in the upper body as well, because you can't just focus on one half of the body and forget about the other. And when you're going through and figuring things out, you have to know your athletes too. Just like my female athletes, for example, tend to not like lifting heavy weight. So you have to find a way to work around it. You have to find a way to make it feel heavy, which is why I like to use the unilateral type stuff, or the single leg or single arm movements, because it gives them that feeling that they're lifting really heavy, but it's really not a whole lot of weight, but it still feels tough, so that we can get some benefit from the resistance training, and they actually buy into it and enjoy it.
Right. So that kind of goes into the whole, like you said before, even though it is a lighter weight, when you take away, the concept of if you lift something with two hands versus one hand, it's always going to be easier with two hands. So if you're using one leg instead of two legs, that makes it seem harder, even though it is less weight, because it actually is harder, because you're focusing more on one aspect of the body versus utilizing many aspects of it.
Right.
And one thing that you touched on that I was actually going to ask you about, and you already hit the nail on the head with it, was that off-season training specifically for basketball is very important, but for other sports as well, is the main thing is that it prevents injury for the most part. If you become stronger, more resilient, and you train well, in the off season, when the in season does come, you're typically, I say typically because there are, some outliers here and there, but you typically
Right.
will be less prone to injuries because of the amount of training that you have done to help your body prevent that.
Right. And the one thing that we don't always focus on the most is the conditioning aspect, because once you get to high school, a lot of kids tend to play other sports. So they're in shape, but there's a difference between football shape and basketball shape. But like as a whole, you're pretty in shape for cardiovascular type stuff. And if you're playing multiple sports, you train different movements, you train different capacities. Like you might do more sprints in one sport and more long distance type things in another. So you get to train different aspects by playing different sports as well. So that's why I like the weight room more, because the kids tend to stay active. They find things to do. They'll play pickup games. They'll play 7-on-7. They'll play travel ball, stuff like that. So typically they'll find a way to stay in shape, especially more of our top level kids, sort of like our all district or all region type players. They'll always be in shape because they're always doing something.
Right. And that was actually, I'm glad that you mentioned that too. That was going to be my next discussion for you. Was we talked about the methods of, off-season training. Well, one of the best, in my opinion, one of the best off-season training aids is actually utilizing and playing other sports that are available. So for instance, basketball was kind of our main focus with this, but when the off-season hits, that basketball player may not always be dribbling the ball. Maybe they play football or they play baseball or whatever the case is, soccer. So
Right.
what is your take and your approach on that, on athletes, specifically basketball players playing other sports? Is there certain sports that you think that are more beneficial than others? Is there some that, that, in your opinion, what is the best way to go about that?
Um, in an ideal world, you always want to play sports that have sort of alternating parts of the body that are taxed. So like playing basketball, that's very lower half heavy because you're jumping, you're running, you're cutting. So it puts a lot of force through your hips, your knees, and your ankles. And then in an ideal world, you go and play baseball where there's a lot of throwing. And then you alternate those back and forth, because when one parts of the body gets taxed, once it sort of gets to its limit, you're starting another sport that starts training a different part of the body. So this part can recover while this part's starting to get stronger. And then when it comes to training, you always want to be one step ahead. So if you're a baseball player about now, if you're a basketball and baseball player, now you should be doing your arm care stuff. You should be doing your rotator cuff, your throwing progressions, your long toss, things like that, so that your body's getting ready for baseball. And then during baseball season, or towards the end of baseball season, you should start, focusing more on leg strength, hip strength, ankle strength with balance, things like that, so you can be ready for basketball. So like you always want to train sort of opposite seasons, if that makes sense.
So kind of like stacking the building blocks, so right on
Exactly.
top of each other. Okay, so that kind of leads me to my next question, which is one of my last questions, which is, in my experience, I've had a lot of football players who play basketball, and have had, vice versa, basketball players that play football. And as we know, as athletic trainers, as football coaches know, basketball coaches, pretty much anyone who knows the sport of American football understands that at any time in the season or off season, any part of the body can be hurt. Football is one of those sports, because it's
Right.
collision based. The whole body is going to be taxed, all the way from the toes even to the mental, because of concussions and so forth. Every aspect of the body is taxed. What would be a good approach for someone who does play basketball and football specifically? Because I know we mentioned baseball and basketball before, but I'm specifically basketball and football, just a little a little summary of what you think is the best way to approach that.
So typically in the high school setting, football would be going on right now. So
Right.
it would be district tournament time, getting ready for postseason, which this would have been a fantastic year for it because it's 70 degrees on November 4th.
Right.
But we don't have that. So typically, when we're having football in the fall, basketball is coming after. So our football players that are playing basketball, they're pretty beat up by this point. And they really need a couple of weeks just to sort of feel better because they get in car crashes every single day because they're just ramming into each other, just collision based all the time. So really just sort of gentle movement just to get their body moving properly again and trying to get them feeling better before they jump into basketball. But now with things flipped, they will be in pretty good shape in terms of explosiveness, power, and conditioning.
Going into the
As
football
as
season.
right, because football season's happening after basketball, so they'll be in better shape, but they won't be quite as strong. Which I'm interested to see what injury rates happen in terms of that, because I have a feeling we might have a little bit lower injury because they're a little bit more pliable, they're a little bit more flexible, and because they're not trying to get as strong as humanly possible and pushing themselves too hard, getting muscle soreness and things like that. Sort of got off track a little bit, but really leading up to football, you're training pure strength. You want to get as big and strong and fast in a straight line as possible. And then with basketball, you sort of need to cut back a little bit on the strength, increase your speed and your agility. So with things being flipped now, I think football might be a little bit more, might have a little bit higher level of play because things are flipped.
Especially specifically for those basketball and football players that play both sports.
Right.
So that's an interesting way to put it, because this is such a unique year because of the way that the seasons are flipped. But just to kind of close out some things now, is there any final thoughts? If there is, if someone were to just skip to the end of the video and you remember one thing from this whole dynamic talk, what would you like for them to remember in a short summary?
Short summary: you want to take your large movements, so your squat, your deadlift, your bench, your pull-ups, your shoulder press, things like that. You want to find which movements are going to benefit your athletes the best in terms of strength, because we want increased strength, and because the higher your strength levels are, the lower your risk of injury is.
Mm-hmm.
So you always want to use those primary compound movements and find different variations that work best for your players and what resources are available to you. And just use that to get as strong as possible.
That's an excellent summary. I think that kind of touched on majority of everything that we even spoke about. So if you could just, like you said, just summarize it down into it, I like that. That's an easy takeaway from it. So for myself, honestly, Jared stole a lot of what I was gonna say because he took away from me. But for me, ultimately, for off-season training, if we're talking specific for basketball, it's utilize what you have. If you have the weight room to utilize it. If you just have outside to go running, sprinting, whatever the case is, jogging, utilize it. So that's my little spiel at the end of it, just from my end. But as we close out, I just want to say thanks to Jared for coming on today, took time out of his day to do this. I appreciate it, Jared, and I hope that everything goes well for you in the upcoming seasons.
Thanks. I really like doing this.
Yeah, no problem, man. So for all of y'all watching, please fill out the survey for Bon Secours Sports Medicine. And I hope you all have a great day.